A boy and a girl raced through the streets. The boy called out behind him, breathless, telling whoever was ahead to wait. The girl beside him glanced at someone and gushed about how cute she was, while the boy looked surprised. The scene shifted to Oche, wide-eyed and clutching a jar, her gaze bright and shimmering, matching the color of an angel's eyes. Something miraculous clung to her. This was the beginning of Oche's world. Then came the door. Oche smacked her head straight into it and crumpled to the ground. In that single painful moment, a flood of memories from another life crashed through her mind. A world without magic, built on science. She had been reincarnated, though the details of her old life remained foggy. No name, no clear face. All she knew was that she was now a small girl living in a slum, malnourished and barely surviving. Her siblings rushed to check on her. Oni said it had made a pretty loud noise and asked if she was all right. Nini crouched down beside her, worry all over her face, asking if it had hit her head. Oche forced a smile and told them she was fine, just a little shaken. The two of them decided to head out and search for food, telling her to rest while they were gone. Oche waved them off and watched them disappear into the streets. Alone in the quiet, her thoughts swirled. Blurred memories, a strange new reality, and the name she went by here, Oche. This was her life now, with Oni and Nini in the slums. Curious about what this world had given her, she activated her status display. A single skill appeared. Imagination creation, level 1, usable once per day. That was it. No magic, no special powers. Disappointment stung, and she wished she could remember more. But the potential of that one skill still intrigued her. One use per day meant every choice had to count. What did she want most right now? Money. That was the obvious answer. If she needed to make anything, it should be money. A 10,000 yen note floated through her imagination, vivid and familiar. But then, it hit her. She had never once seen the currency of this world. Growing up in the slums meant local coins were a mystery. The idea collapsed. She flopped onto the ground, defeated, muttering to herself about what to do. Her stomach answered for her. Lying there, hunger gnawed at her insides. She could not remember the last time she had eaten anything decent in this world. Then, memories of food from her past life drifted in. Dishes and flavors she had nearly forgotten. That was the answer. She could imagine food. Since the skill worked only once a day, it had to be something filling, something all three of them could share. Nini and Oni deserved a real meal. Her mind was made up. She activated imagination creation. A 5-kilogram bag of no-rinse koshihikari rice from Aichi Prefecture materialized in front of her, priced at 2,280 yen. A squeal of pure excitement escaped her. It had actually worked. When Nini and Oni came home, they stopped in the doorway, surprised by a strange light. They asked if Oche was all right after hitting her head. Nini pulled her into a tight hug, still worried. Oche giggled and said she was already fine. Then, she grabbed their hands and dragged them over to look. She told them it was food. The siblings stared at the strange bag, completely confused. Oche beamed and explained it was called rice, the stuff inside. Oni wanted to know how she had gotten it. Oche puffed up with pride and announced she had used her skill to make it. Nini's eyes went wide. Tears welled up as the reality of it sank in. She told Oche it was amazing. A warm blush crept across Oche's face. She noticed the tears and asked if Nini was crying. Nini shook her head and said it was nothing, just an old memory coming back. Oni cut through the moment, eager as always. If it was food, they should hurry up and eat it. Oche laid out the process. Rice in a pot, add water, boil until the water was gone. Simple steps for fluffy, sweet rice. Nini stepped up and used her water magic to fill the pot. Oni grinned and handled the fire with his own fire magic. Oche watched the two of them in awe, a twinge of envy flickering through her. She had always dreamed of becoming a magical girl, but that was not her path. The pot bubbled over the fire, steam curling upward. Oche talked them through the process, murmuring instructions. First, a little trickle, she said, adjusting the heat. One of the siblings tilted their head and asked, "What's that, a spell?" The moment was curious and almost magical in its own way. Soon, the aroma hit. Nini and Oni could barely hold still, the smell driving them wild. They begged to eat, asking over and over if it was done yet. Oche was drooling too, but she held firm. She promised to make them the best rice they had ever tasted. Finally, plates of steaming koshihikari rice sat before them. All three stared at the food, gulping in anticipation. Nini took the first bite. Her eyes lit up. She said it was her first time eating rice, but it was sweet and delicious. Ani shoved a mouthful in and declared it was incredible. Ochibi could not hold back anymore. Tears streamed down her face as she said that rice really was the best and that they needed to spread it to the world. Nini looked startled by the outburst, but Ochibi just kept eating, overwhelmed with joy. They went back for seconds. Nini shyly asked for just a little more. Ochibi happily said she would grab another serving too. For the first time in longer than any of them could remember, their stomachs were full. The meal left them warm and quiet. They sat close together, smiling, holding each other. Nini thanked Ochibi, her voice soft and genuine. Oni said it was the first time he had felt full in ages, and thanked her too. Ochibi shook her head. She was the one who should be grateful. She thanked them for the wild greens they always gathered, for taking care of her, for everything. Silently, her thoughts turned heavier. They were just children surviving in the slums, and yet Nini and Oni had taken her in despite her being a burden. The filth, the hunger, the constant danger. If they stayed here, all three of them would be in trouble. That truth sat in her chest like a stone. The decision came clearly. She would use every memory from her past life to pull them out of this place. Imagination creation would be the tool, but first, she needed to understand how money worked in this world. That was step one. Ochibi stood up, small fists clenched, resolve burning in her eyes. She was going to build a better life for Nini and Oni, no matter what it took. Her siblings glanced over from where they sat, amused. To them, it looked like she had invented some kind of new game. They had no idea she was dead serious. With her resolve fresh, Ochibi sat down with Nini and Oni and asked them directly how people earned money around here. Oni said the only real option was selling valuables to shops. Nini added that slum dwellers could not get proper jobs because of discrimination. All they could do was gather what they found and trade it. Things like rabbit meat or mouse meat at butcher shops, maybe medicinal herbs if they were lucky. Ochibi thought it over, pulling from her past life memories. The classic isekai strategy was selling salts, spices, sweets, or things foraged from the wild. Images of honey, pepper, and salt drifted through her mind. Honey, that was the one. It was valuable, easy to explain, and all she had to do was make sure no one got suspicious about where it came from. Imagination creation activated. A 1,200-gram jar of blended honey appeared in front of her. Nini jumped, wide-eyed, immediately recognizing the skill at work. One flinched and blurted out how startled he was. Ochibi held up the jar and explained it was honey inside a glass container. The plan was to sell it for money, but Nine raised a concern right away. If slum children walked into a shop carrying a pristine glass jar full of honey, the staff would assume it was stolen. Glass was precious in this world, and a container like that would draw way too much attention. Oni agreed. Selling something that fancy out in the open was asking for trouble, so they adjusted. They poured about 100 grams of honey into a small, broken container, something that would not look out of place for kids from the slums. The rest stayed hidden. The goal was simple: earn money without attracting the wrong kind of attention. The three of them headed to Joshua's general store, but they went around to the back door. Slum children entering through the front would only invite prejudice. At the back, a woman named Jane greeted them and asked what they needed. They explained they wanted to sell honey. Jane agreed to take a look, tasted a small amount, and her eyes widened. She confirmed it was high-quality honey with no unpleasant taste or appearance, and she got ready to weigh it. Nini felt relieved, thinking to herself that the woman really was kind. Jane apologized for making them wait while she finished weighing. She mentioned that other stores did not even bother weighing things properly for kids like them, often brushing off their concerns entirely. The siblings appreciated the care. The honey came out to 98 grams. At 2 real per gram, Jane offered 196 real. All three of them stared at the coins, wide-eyed and stunned. They could barely believe it was real. They thanked her over and over. Nini and Oni were ecstatic on the way back. They told Ochibi that thanks to her, they could eat meat today. A thought crossed Ochibi's mind. A plate of field mouse meat bought for 3 real alongside rice from the night before. She reflected on what she had learned about money from the slum stalls. 1 real was roughly equal to $1, or about 120 to 140 yen. That meant the honey sale had been worth around 20,000 yen. The number stunned her all over again. A mental currency lesson followed. Large gold coins, small gold coins, silver coins, copper coins, each with their own denominations. She filed it all away. Every scrap of knowledge was another step toward escaping the slums. Back at their hideout, they ate the dried meat together. Nini and Oni said it was delicious. Ochibi hesitated at first. Her past life memories made the idea of field mouse meat hard to stomach, but hunger one out. Once she took a bite, the salty, savory flavor mixed surprisingly well with the sweetness of the rice. Her siblings noticed her strange reaction and looked concerned, but she played it off. The next morning, they chewed on black bread bought alongside the meat, and Oche got serious. She told Nine and Oni that things had to change if they wanted to leave the slums. The first step was getting clean. Both siblings were taken aback by the bluntness. They looked at themselves and had to admit she was right. They were filthy. Nini apologized with an awkward laugh, but everyone agreed if they could present themselves well, town shops might actually let them walk in through the front door like normal customers. Oche painted the picture, walking in, being greeted politely, treated like real people. Nini smiled warmly and praised Oche for being so smart. Oche laid out the full plan: wash their bodies every day, clean their clothes regularly. When the siblings pointed out they would have nothing to wear while their clothes dried, Oche grinned and suggested buying new ones with the money from the honey. They went to a slum stall and picked out 3 sets of clothing for 150 real. Nene held hers up and said they were cute. Oni tugged at his and muttered that it felt odd and a bit tight on him. Oche figured 150 real was about 4,000 yen, pricey for secondhand items, but it was worth it. With new outfits and proper hygiene, they would not look like slum kids anymore. Nini was clearly pleased. Oni fidgeted in his new clothes, still adjusting. After the purchase, anxiety hit Oni. He worried they were burning through money too fast. Oche reassured him it was a necessary expense, an investment in their future. They had to take bold steps if they ever wanted to leave the slums. Onai took a breath, nodded, and said he would do his best. He thanked Oche and told her she was impressive for thinking so far ahead. Next came the big creation. Oche decided to save the soap for tomorrow. Today, she had something else in mind. She activated imagination creation, and a full-sized fiberglass bathtub materialized out of thin air, valued at 54,800 yen. Nene and Oni stared at the massive thing, completely bewildered. Oche explained the setup. Nene could fill it with water magic, and Oni could heat it with fire magic. Then, practically glowing with excitement, she suggested they all take a bath together. The room went silent. Oni's face turned red, and he quickly stammered that he would bathe later, by himself. Nene gently explained that only girls could bathe together. Oche blinked, the embarrassment hitting her all at once. She blamed it on being in a child's body. Her adult mind sometimes forgot how things worked in this small frame. She apologized to her siblings for the awkward moment and made a mental note to be more careful. After getting cleaned up, the 3 of them headed back to the shop to sell more honey. When they knocked, a cheerful voice called out from inside. The shopkeeper opened the door and stopped in her tracks, eyes wide. She barely recognized them. Clean skin, fresh clothes, neat hair. They looked like completely different children. She told them they had really changed. Earlier, Oche had used imagination creation to produce soap, a simple plant-based bar that had cost 88 yen in her past life. The 3 of them had scrubbed their bodies and washed their clothes until they were spotless. The shopwoman praised their effort, telling them it would lead to good things. All 3 bowed deeply, barely able to contain their excitement. They thanked her, voices overlapping in gratitude. Oche presented 102 grams of honey for sale, earning 204 real. Then, she gathered her courage and asked the question that mattered most. Nervously, she asked if they could come into the store through the front door next time. The shopwoman smiled and agreed, though she reminded them not to cause any trouble for the other customers. The 3 of them lit up. They thanked her over and over, thrilled by the milestone. Back at their hideout, the siblings tallied up what they had spent. 3 pairs of used sandals had cost 120 real. Dried meat and bread came to 126 real. That left a balance of 118 real. It was tight, but every purchase had been necessary. They were no longer filthy slum kids. They looked like real town children now. The conversation turned to the future. With money coming in and their appearance improving, they wondered if they could stay at an inn in town. But Nini shook her head. She explained that inns required identification, either a citizen certificate or a guild membership card. Without one, no inn would take them. Oche groaned. It always came back to money, or paperwork, or both. I knew it. It's money, she muttered. But then an idea formed. They would visit the Hunter Guild. If they could register as hunters and get guild cards, that would serve as identification. She proposed they sell honey again the next day and then head straight to the guild. Nini agreed that at the very least, they should go ask about it. The next day arrived, and for the first time, the 3 of them walked up to the front door of the shop. They hesitated for a moment, nervous about entering openly. Doubts flickered between them, but determination won out. Together, they pushed the door open and stepped inside. Jane greeted them warmly, noting how clean they looked. She complimented them as they presented the honey they had brought and asked casually how they collected it. Before Oni could answer, Oche jumped in, quickly explaining that they gathered it every day. She did not want him accidentally revealing her skill. Then, the shop owner himself appeared. He introduced himself as Joshua and said the woman beside him was his wife, Jane. He told the children he had been curious about them for a while. The honey they had been bringing was consistently excellent, and he had wanted to meet the suppliers. He noticed their clean appearance and seemed genuinely impressed. The siblings felt welcomed, praised, and for the first time, treated like real customers. It was a huge step forward. Joshua told them he welcomed customers who brought good products, regardless of where they came from. Oche felt a surge of gratitude. Even knowing they were from the slums, he treated them with respect. That settled it for her. She could trust this man. She made her move. With a wink to her siblings, Oche reached into their bag and pulled out the glass jar. Joshua's eyes went wide. He could not believe what he was looking at. "Don't tell me, is this glass?" he asked, stunned. Oche confirmed it and added that there was honey inside for sale. The room went quiet for a moment. Nini and Oni exchanged nervous glances. One whispered, asking if it was really okay to do this. They worried about attracting too much attention, about someone kidnapping Oche if her skill was discovered. But one of the siblings reassured the others, animatedly explaining that Oche had a special secret and knew what she was doing. Oche told them to trust her. She had already weighed the risks. With a smug grin, she declared this was all part of her plan. Her siblings could only stare, caught between admiration and disbelief. Joshua asked if they were willing to sell the entire jar. Oche asked how much he was willing to pay. When he pressed about where it came from, Oche grinned and said she could not reveal her business secrets. Oni and Nini panicked, stammering that the goods were not stolen and swearing their innocence. Joshua and Jane watched the whole scene and burst out laughing. They pointed out that if the children had stolen it, they would not be selling it openly in a shop. Jane added that she had never seen glass this clear and smooth. They suspected some kind of magic was involved, but told the kids they would not ask any more questions. One of them exclaimed about Oche's foresight, impressed she had planned this far ahead. Joshua apologized for any inconvenience and got down to appraising the items. He confirmed the honey would continue to be bought at 2 ril per gram. The honey in the jar weighed 1,001 grams, coming to 2,002 ril. Then came the jar itself. Joshua held it up, admiring the transparency, the smooth surface, the tight-fitting lid. He offered 10,000 ril for the glass container alone. The 3 siblings froze. 10,000 ril. Oche's mind raced, converting the number. That was roughly 1.2 to 1.4 million yen. Her knees nearly buckled. Combined with the honey, the total came to 12,002 ril. Their wealth had just exploded. Outside the shop, reality sank in. Ani admitted he was scared carrying that much money. They discussed how to protect themselves and agreed to tell anyone who asked that their earnings came from a shared magical ability between the 3 of them. That way, no single person would be targeted. With their pockets heavy and their spirits high, the 3 of them set off toward the Hunter Guild. Oche led the way, practically bouncing with excitement. She had heard there was a beautiful receptionist there and could not wait to see. Nini and Oni trailed behind, one of them muttering something about needing a drink after everything that had happened. The Hunter Guild was bigger and more impressive than anything they had seen. As they walked toward it, the 3 of them exchanged uncertain glances, unsure of where exactly to go. Oche steadied herself, silently reminding herself that she had to protect Nini and Oni no matter what. Near the entrance, a scarred man warned them to be careful, saying guilds could be rough places. Inside, they met a charismatic receptionist named Irene. She greeted them warmly, asking if it was their first time at the guild. The siblings confirmed that they were looking to register, but had no idea how the process worked. Irene was beautiful, composed, and carried herself like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. So this was the guild's beautiful lady. When Irene called her cute, Oche blushed completely, flustered by the compliment. She thought to herself that Irene was both beautiful and kind. Irene smiled and introduced herself formally before explaining the next steps. The guild had a ranking system from grade 1 through grade 5 based on contributions. Anyone 12 or older could register with full status. Oche's heart sank when she heard the age requirement, worried that she would be turned away, but Irene quickly reassured them. Provisional registration was available for those under 12. Then came the fees. Without a citizen certificate, registration cost 500 ril per person. For the 3 of them, that meant 1,500 ril. Oche winced at the number, converting it in her head. It was a lot. but they had the money from the glass jar and honey sales. Over 12,000 real in total. They could afford it. With that settled, they told Irene they wanted to register all three. She handed them the application forms and asked if they needed someone to fill them out. The siblings thanked Irene warmly, and Nini stepped forward confidently, saying she would handle the writing. Oche eagerly declared that she would write too, but the moment she picked up the pen, reality hit. She could not read or write the letters of this world at all. Her past life memories gave her knowledge of Japanese and English, but neither was useful here. Nini took over with ease, her handwriting neat and confident. She had clearly received some kind of education before ending up in the slums. Oni, on the other hand, could barely manage more than his own name. As Nini filled out the forms, their real names came to light. Nini was Ciel, 13 years old. Oni was Marco, 15. Oche had always known them only by their nicknames. The forms required them to list skills and any magic they wanted to highlight. Ciel wrote down water magic for herself and fire magic for Marco. They all agreed to keep Oche's imagination creation skill a secret. It was too dangerous to put on paper. Then came the question of Oche's name. She did not have one. She had been abandoned in the slums 2 years ago and had only ever been called Oche. She panicked for a moment, wondering if they would actually register her under that nickname. Before she could say anything, Ciel had already written something down. She announced that she had set the little one's name as Ami, explaining that it meant friend. Ami stared at her, caught between shock and a strange warmth. Nobody had asked her, but the name stuck. From now on, she was Ami. They handed in the forms and received their registration tags, small necklace-like items that served as their hunter identification. Ciel distributed them, and they each put one on. It felt official. They were hunters now. Ami asked about places to stay. She learned about a dormitory and an open yard available at reasonable rates. The dormitory sounded safer, but the open yard was cheaper. They examined the open yard, assessing how spacious it was, and decided to check it out. The backyard was huge. White lines marked out squares on the ground for individual plots, but nobody else was there. The whole yard was empty. Marco guessed that maybe everyone was staying in the dormitory instead. Ciel noted that the bumpy ground would be uncomfortable to sleep on, but Ami had a different idea entirely. She was not planning to sleep on the ground. Their belongings, the rice, the bathtub, everything they had accumulated would stand out in a dormitory. They needed somewhere private. Ciel nodded, saying she wanted a spot where they would not attract attention. Ami scanned the yard and spotted a patch of tall grass growing along the far edge. She lit up. That would be their hiding spot. The others agreed immediately. Ciel smiled at the idea, and Marco started thinking about how to move their heavy items from the slum. Ami activated imagination creation. An aluminum folding cart with puncture-free tires materialized in front of them, valued at 89,800 yen. Marco's jaw dropped. He inspected it, watching as it unfolded into a sturdy two-wheeled cart capable of hauling serious weight. He could barely contain himself, calling it incredibly cool. His face flushed, and his eyes a little teary from sheer excitement. "So cool," he stammered, wiping his face. Then Ami noticed something. Her skill had leveled up to level 2, which meant she could now use it twice a day instead of once. She pumped her fist in the air, thrilled by the upgrade. Her status confirmed it. Ami, imagination creation, level 2, 2 uses per day. She declared she was going to create something they could actually live in this time, earning praise from her siblings. They paid the fee for the open yard and headed back to the slum to pack up. Everything was loaded onto the cart and covered with a large cloth to keep it hidden. They cleared pathways through the tall grass, leaving some for concealment. Ami struggled to use her skill again. She tried to imagine expensive vehicles, camping cars, and the like, but nothing appeared. The skill would not produce them. After several failed attempts that worried her siblings, she adjusted her thinking and went for something cheaper and simpler. A used van appeared, modest and well-worn. It was not glamorous, but it had walls, windows, and a roof. Hidden in the tall grass, it was perfect, their new home. Ami stood back and looked at what they had accomplished. The grass had been cleared, and the field around them was finally open. She thought about what to create for a temporary home, something mobile. A large camper came to mind first, the kind of foreign vehicle she remembered from her past life. She activated imagination creation, but nothing happened. Frustrated, she tried something smaller, a camper based on a light truck. Still nothing. She kept trying, going simpler and simpler, but failure after failure piled up. Worry crept in. If the skill could not produce anything, they might have to go back to the slum. Then, finally, something worked. A van materialized in front of her. The San Ovan 660 Yasa 4WD, 155,000 kilometers on it, priced at 148,000 yen. Relief flooded through her. She celebrated, practically bouncing on her feet. Looking back at the failures, she guessed the price might have been the deciding factor. Expensive items seemed to be out of reach. She made a mental note to test the limits further when she had the chance. Ciel and Marco gathered around as Ami proudly introduced the van as their new home. She pointed out the features. It was durable, compact, and easy to move if they ever needed to relocate. The light pack design meant it could handle weather and keep them sheltered. Marco was visibly impressed, calling it cool and admiring how practical it was. Ami explained that it would protect them from rain and cold, a massive upgrade from the slum. The next concern was keeping their setup secret from the guild. Ami reassured her siblings, suggesting they camouflage the van using scraps and materials from their old dwelling. They would build a tent-like structure around it so it blended in with the surroundings. The others agreed right away, eager to get started. Together, they organized their belongings and set everything in place. When the work was done, a wave of relief washed over all three of them. They had made it out. They were no longer living in the slums. Ami suggested they go for dinner to celebrate, even though it was still early. Ciel smiled and agreed that the move was basically done. Marco jumped up with enthusiasm. Ami pointed out that with everything that had happened, they were probably hungrier than usual. It was the perfect excuse to celebrate their escape. Ami wanted to try the food at the Hunter Guild's cafeteria. Ciel hesitated, asking if they were even allowed to eat there. Marco puffed out his chest, pulled out his registration card, and reminded them that they were guild members now. Ami confirmed they had 10,167 real, more than enough to spare. With that settled, the three of them headed to the cafeteria. The cafeteria was empty when they walked in. Ami guessed it was because the afternoon was still too early for the dinner crowd. Before they could settle in, a man appeared, his face marked by a large diagonal scar. He eyed them with comic intensity and asked if they were newcomers. Ami fumbled nervously and confirmed they had just registered that day. She held up her registration card as proof. The man's expression softened immediately. He welcomed them and handed over a menu. The siblings let out a collective sigh of relief and thanked him. They opened the menu and stared at it. The language barrier hit them hard. None of them could read it properly. Ami turned to the man and called him Master San, asking if he had any recommendations. He introduced himself as Mason, the master of the cafeteria, and suggested the day's special, a boar steak set for 5 ril. The moment he said the word meat, the siblings perked up. They asked for 3 servings, but Mason held up his hand. He recommended ordering just 2 for the 3 of them, saying it would be plenty and he did not want them to waste food. Ami was taken aback for a moment, wondering if this was some kind of guild hazing, but she shook it off and steeled herself, determined to protect her siblings if anything went wrong. Mason was genuinely looking out for them though. With a wink, he even offered a special chair so Amy could sit comfortably and reach the table. She was touched by his unexpected kindness. Despite the scar and the worn apron, there was real warmth behind it all. Ami thought to herself that he was actually kind of endearing. They sat down and let the moment sink in. Ami admitted she felt bad for being afraid of him earlier. Ciel smiled and said that Mason was really kind. Looking around the cafeteria in quiet awe, Ciel murmured that she never thought the day would come when they could eat in a place like this. Ami agreed, saying she was looking forward to their first real meal out. The mood shifted as the siblings reflected on everything it had taken to get here. Ciel's eyes grew wet. She told Ami that they never would have escaped the slums without her. Marco nodded, his expression serious for once. A flash of memory passed between them. The filth, the hunger, the days when survival was not guaranteed. Tears streamed down their faces. That's why, thank you, Ciel said softly. Then the memories went further back. Ciel and Marco remembered the day they had first found Ami. She had been tiny, abandoned, and alone. They recalled her eyes, the same color as the angel's eyes, something rare and almost otherworldly. They had wondered if it was fate or divine intervention that had brought her to them. Marco's face darkened for a moment. "I hate God," he muttered. They had worried about leaving Ami alone because someone might have taken her to the church, and that was a fate they wanted to protect her from. So they had taken her home with them instead. Back in the present, the food arrived, and the weight of the past lifted. They sat together, sharing a proper meal for the first time outside of their makeshift home. Ami looked at her siblings and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She thought to herself that Ciel and Marco had become her foundation in this world. Without them, none of this would have been possible. "Let's eat," Ciel cheered. They dug in together, a family bound not by blood, but by everything they had survived. As they ate, a figure watched them from a distance. The person murmured to themselves, wondering what those kids were. They mentioned a name, the name of an angel, one that was feared and usually avoided. Something about these children had caught their attention, and they were not going to look away. The next morning, the three of them gathered with a shared sense of purpose. They had escaped the slums, but that was only the beginning. To truly stabilize their lives, they needed to build a track record at the Hunter Guild. They pumped themselves up, agreeing to do their best, and headed straight to the guild. When they arrived, the place was packed. The main hall was full of adult hunters, and the height difference alone made it dangerous for children to push through the crowd. They decided to wait until things thinned out. Ciel, the only one who could read, was determined to check the request board despite the risk. Ami and Marco worried about her getting hurt in the crush. Once they got a look at the available requests, their spirits dropped. Most of them involved catching monsters, hunting animals, or collecting rare plants. All of it was too dangerous or too complicated for three kids with no combat training. Ami knew they could not take on anything that put them at physical risk, not without proper preparation. They considered gathering medicinal herbs, but none of them knew the first thing about identifying plants in this world. Ami's past life knowledge was useless when it came to local flora. The group then wondered where quests even came from. They considered shops, clinics, churches, town officials, and even nobles. But nobles and officials would not care about low-ranking newcomers, and the church was out of the question. None of them wanted anything to do with it. Then, an idea struck Ami. There was something only they could provide. She told her siblings they were going to visit Joshua's general store with a plan. Ciel and Marco looked confused, but followed her lead. Jane greeted them warmly when they arrived and asked if they had brought honey. The siblings shook their heads. They were there for a different reason. Proudly, they announced that they had joined the Hunter Guild, and both Joshua and Jane congratulated them on the accomplishment. Ciel thanked Jane directly, saying that her fair treatment had helped them get this far. The group expressed genuine gratitude for being treated like human beings, despite coming from the slums. Then, Ami got to the point. She asked Joshua to submit a request through the Hunter Guild specifically for their honey, positioning it as a luxury item. Joshua contemplated the idea, considering how the request would be received. Ami explained the challenge. They could not reveal their secret source, but they still needed an official channel to sell through. The guild's quest system was the answer. They discussed the details further. Trading through the guild would let them advertise that the products came from a legitimate hunter quest. It would also count as a completed request, building their track record and earning them credit toward future promotions. Even though the guild's handling fee would cut into their profits slightly, Joshua agreed it was a solid plan, despite the small financial hit. Ami and her siblings explained that they wanted to prove they were independent and honest. They needed visible evidence that they could stand on their own. Joshua understood completely. The product would be listed under the name Nihonsei Honey Blended, a code that only they knew the meaning of. No one else would be able to figure out what it really was or where it came from, so there was no risk of their secret getting out. The conversation shifted to what else they could sell. Joshua and Jane mentioned wanting to know what was in demand and opened themselves to new ideas. Ami thought about her imagination creation skill and wondered if she could create items in bulk, producing a larger quantity in a single use. She focused, and it worked. A substantial batch of soaps materialized, an herbal soap gift set containing rose, lavender, and chamomile bars. Everyone stared in amazement at the quantity she had produced from a single use of her skill. Joshua and Jane congratulated her, impressed by the bulk production. The trio tested the soaps. Jane lathered one up, and her eyes went wide. She raved about the foam and the scent, saying it made her feel like an aristocrat. Joshua picked one up and noted it was the first soap he had ever encountered that did not smell like fur. "Darling, this would sell?" he exclaimed, turning to Jane. They discussed pricing and settled on 100 ril per bar. Ami converted that in her head and was stunned. Over 10,000 yen per soap. Combined with the honey requests, they now had 2 steady income streams through the guild. Ami could barely contain her excitement, thinking about how they could earn money and build their quest completion record at the same time. Their current funds sat at 10,907 ril. At the Hunter Guild, they ran into the receptionist, Irene. She suggested they pay the open field rental in a lump sum instead of coming in every few days, since it would be inconvenient to visit so many times. They agreed and took care of it. A brief discussion followed about whether they planned to keep living together in the yard long term. Then, Irene asked if the three of them always worked together. When they confirmed it, she recommended they officially form a team. She explained that a team would let them share merit points and make rank advancement easier. It would be more convenient and more profitable. Forming a team would not cost them anything, just an application form to fill out. She also mentioned that the little one could not be promoted until reaching a certain age. The siblings looked at each other and assured her it was fine. Ciel filled out the application. They discussed their main duties and agreed to acknowledge each other's roles, listing gathering as their primary function. Then came the question of a team name. Ami noticed something amusing. When Ciel had picked her personal name, she had done it without asking. But now, for the team name, everyone was being consulted. Ami shook off the irony and focused on coming up with something fitting. With determination in her expression, she resolved to find the right name. After tossing around ideas, Ami suggested Shusa, a word meaning success or rising in status. The others sounded it out and liked the ring of it. Irene commented that it had a nice feel to it. Ami reflected on the name, thinking it sounded like something from a foreign language in this world. But the meaning was perfect. It captured everything they were striving for. With fists raised and excitement in their voices, the three of them officially became Team Shusa. They cheered together, declaring that Team Shusa would do their absolute best from here on out. Team Shusa's first order of business was checking the request board. Ciel scanned the listings, and her face lit up. "There it is!" she exclaimed. A permanent request from Joshua's general store for Nihonsei, soaps, and honey. The group cheered, excited to see the soap included alongside the honey. They were confused about what a permanent request actually meant. Irene grinned and told them to leave it to her. She broke down the three types of guild requests: normal, designated, and permanent. Permanent requests were the simplest. They could be accepted and completed at any time without formal procedures. All that was needed was a delivery report upon completion. She also mentioned that the reports came with magic verification to prevent counterfeiting. Ami was impressed, thinking to herself that it reminded her of systems from her past life. The group smiled and thanked Irene for the clear explanation. They realized the permanent format was perfect for them. It meant quiet, unobtrusive work with no need to register each time. Ami figured Joshua had been considerate in setting it up that way, and the team decided to deliver their goods to him right away. At Joshua's general store, they thanked him for making it a permanent request and apologized for assuming he had done it out of special consideration. Joshua waved it off, saying he had only done it because repeatedly issuing the same request was a hassle. He checked the items they had brought: soaps and honey, all created using Ami's imagination creation skill. The numbers were tallied up. The honey with its glass container came to 12,400 ril, and the soaps totaled 1,500 ril. The grand total was 13,900 ril. Ami did the conversion in her head and nearly choked. That was well over 1,000,000 yen. Joshua mentioned he was planning to pitch the products to larger clients, which meant even more business down the road. They agreed on daily deliveries, and both sides left the meeting satisfied. The conversation took a darker turn when the topic of potential buyers came up. Someone suggested selling to the church, and Joshua's expression hardened immediately. He flatly refused, saying he would never sell his merchandise to the church, no matter how much they offered. He could not stand people who seemed to worship money instead of God. Jane backed him up, criticizing those who exploited religion for personal gain. "They think that if they mention God's name, anything will be forgiven," she said. Ami glanced at Marco. He looked visibly relieved that their products would not be associated with the church. Ciel noticed too, and commented that it looked like Marco was relieved. Ami wondered just how bad the church's reputation really was, but she did not push the subject. Joshua steered the conversation back to business, asking them to deliver as much as they could going forward. He handed them a delivery report, complete with magic verification, and they thanked him wholeheartedly. Back at the guild, Ami could not contain herself. "The quest has been completed," she announced proudly. The receptionist blinked in surprise, asking if they were done already. The children hesitated for a moment, suddenly wary that maybe they had done something wrong. But the receptionist checked the report, confirmed the magic proof, and reassured them that everything was in order. "Congratulations, you have completed your first quest," she told them. The three of them beamed with pride. Then came the financial lesson. The receptionist explained that 20% of the reward would be deducted, split evenly between tax and guild commission. Ciel's eyes went wide at the number. Ami admitted it was quite a lot, but accepted it as a necessary expense to build their track record. The net reward came to 11,120 real. The receptionist asked how they wanted to receive it, cash or deposit. The guild offered a deposit system where they could store their money to avoid carrying large sums. The siblings were amazed. "It's like a bank," one of them exclaimed. Ami proposed splitting the reward 4 ways, 1 share for the team account and 1 for each of them personally. Ciel asked why they would go through the trouble. Ami explained she wanted to save money for her future self. Not long ago, they had been just surviving in the slums. Now they had a chance to think about the future and plan ahead. Ciel and Marco agreed, deciding together to think about the future and deposit. The 11,120 ril was split equally, 2,780 ril into each of the 4 accounts. Irene's eyes filled with tears. She told them she understood and that they were such good kids. Ami stared at her, surprised, and asked if she was actually crying. Their simple act of planning for the future had moved Irene more than they expected. With their first quest done and the finances handled while it was still morning, Ami found herself wondering what to do with the rest of the day. She wanted to try magic, but her status had already confirmed she had none, only the imagination creation skill at level 2. Still, a longing to learn lingered, reinforced by memories of her past life. She asked Ciel and Marco to show her their magic instead. They agreed cheerfully. Ciel went first. Her attribute was water. She produced a ball of water, floating it in the air. Ami watched in fascination, reflecting on how much Ciel had improved since she used to fill the bathtub. The practical possibilities raced through Ami's mind. She imagined using water magic for things like laundry. Ciel was thrilled by the idea and wanted to explore more uses for her abilities. Then it was Marco's turn. They moved to the open field outside. Ami asked him about using fire magic, wondering if he could do it without burning the grass. Marco corrected her assumption. It was not just fire. With excitement in his voice, he revealed that he could also perform wind magic. The revelation sparked curiosity and anticipation. There was clearly more to discover about what he could do. Marco demonstrated his wind magic one more time. The gentle breeze brushed against Ami's face, and she smiled. "So cool," she said. Marco admitted it was not much, just a small gust, and acknowledged he did not get many chances to use it. Then, he switched to fire, producing a flame from his fingertip. Ami's eyes went wide. "Wow," she breathed. Marco mentioned feeling great, full of energy from eating properly. He was not exhausted at all. Ami thought to herself that having enough food really was making a difference. She asked him to stretch the flame longer and thinner. He did, shaping it with surprising control. When Ami suggested he try holding it, Marco gripped the flame without flinching. Then the idea hit them both. A sword of flame. "A sword of flame?" Ami exclaimed. They kept experimenting, making the fire grow larger and float in the air. Ami guided him, suggesting he try weaving his wind magic into it for an impressive special move. The results were weak though. His wind could barely push the fire at all. Still, Ami praised him as amazing and so cool. She told him not to worry. Magic was about imagination, and with practice, he would get there. They were determined to keep experimenting with various forms of magic. That evening, Ami imagined practical uses for the magic she had seen, thinking about how wind and water could handle things like drying laundry. They gathered at the guild cafeteria for dinner. After a satisfying meal, Ami mentioned she had needed a nap earlier, while Ciel and Marco had been practicing. With the meal done, the conversation turned to how they should spend their idle time. Ami said she wanted Ciel and Marco to keep working on their magic, but for herself, she wanted to learn to read and write. Ciel offered to teach her, but Ami thought a proper guild course would be better for everyone. Each of them had different goals, and tailored instruction would serve them all more effectively. Mason, the cafeteria master, overheard their conversation and suggested they look into the guild's courses. He listed out the options: reading, writing, arithmetic, magic training, swordsmanship, and more. "Yes," Ami exclaimed, determined to take advantage of every opportunity. Irene appeared, drink in hand, and promised to explain the courses in detail. The siblings looked at her glass with concern, but she waved it off, insisting she could work just fine while drinking. Besides, it was to celebrate their team's first quest completion. She treated the group to glasses of milk while she laid out the offerings. The guild's courses covered everything from basic life skills like reading, writing, arithmetic, and etiquette to more specialized training in magic and swordsmanship. Mason brought the milk over as Irene detailed the tuition, warning that most hunters found the fees too steep to bother. Ami did the math. The courses were expensive, but she saw them as an investment they could not pass up. She declared she would take reading and writing, law and systems, and etiquette. Ciel and Marco chose magic basics, and Marco added swordsmanship. Ami playfully told Ciel she should take etiquette too, since she was beautiful enough to pull it off. Ciel agreed with a shy smile. Irene confirmed that classes could be adjusted to fit their schedule and suggested starting the next day. They mapped it out: reading and writing at 11, law and systems at 1 in the afternoon, and etiquette at 2. Ciel and Marco would have their own courses at matching times. Ami's siblings emphasized that she needed to rest at noon to stay alert in class. The financial side came next. Ami confidently decided to pay up front, referencing their earnings from previous work. Irene looked amused at their upbeat approach. With the courses locked in, Ami used imagination creation to prepare honey and soap for delivery. The next morning, they dropped everything off at Joshua's general store and received thanks, marking another successful day. The 7 days of courses flew by. Each morning, Team Shusa delivered honey and soaps to Joshua's shop and completed the guild procedures. The quest completion reward came to 11,360 ril after tax and guild fees were deducted, split evenly into 4 deposits of 2,840 ril each. The days were packed. One sibling trained with a sword and walked away with a sense of accomplishment. Another beamed with happiness over something shiny. Ami sat attentively in class, taking notes. Straight from deliveries, they went to their guild classes. By the time evening came around, the exhaustion hit. "I'm tired," Ami groaned as they returned to their spot. But despite the fatigue, the mood at the cafeteria that night was electric. "There's so much to do," one of them said, "but every day is fulfilling and fun," another added. They talked about everything they were learning and how much more they understood about the world now. Ami mentioned that the place they lived was ruled by Viscount Aurelia, something she had picked up in class. Reading and writing had been coming along, and the excitement of learning was contagious. Then came the big revelation. In magic class, the instructor had told Ciel and Marco something shocking. The way they used magic was abnormal. They had been using it in their own way without being taught by anyone. They did not rely on standard incantations, and they could change the shape and size of their spells after activation, something that normally required extremely high magic strength and control. The instructor was stunned by what they could do. Ciel reported back to Ami, beaming with pride. For someone who had spent her whole life being looked down on by the townspeople, having a real expert watch and praise her magic meant the world. Marco was thrilled too, showing off the flame stick he had been using in swordsmanship training. He declared with excitement that he would show everyone a cool flame sword. Ami watched them both and felt a pang of envy. She wished she could use magic too. For a moment, she felt like the only weak one in the group. That evening, someone sat alone in the cafeteria, holding a drink, quietly raising a toast to the future of Team Shusa. Ami, watching from nearby, made a mental note. She thought about using imagination creation to create a bottle of quality alcohol as a gift for Irene, who clearly loved her drinks. With the 7-day guild courses behind them, Ami got back to work. She stood beside a fresh jar of honey and a collection of soaps, the products of her imagination creation skill, and let out a relieved sigh. Phew, the deliveries were ready to go. Then, her status screen flickered and updated. Imagination creation had leveled up to level 3. 3 uses per day now. Yay! Ami cheered, pumping her fist. She also noticed something else. Her condition had changed from malnutrition to low nutrition state. It was still not great, but it was better. The regular meals were making a difference. With 1 creation left for the day, she turned to Ciel and Marco with a grin, sharing her excitement about being able to create something again with her newly leveled up skill. Both siblings reacted with pride. "Ochibi-chan, you're so amazing," they exclaimed. Ami giggled happily. She asked if there was anything they wanted her to make. Both of them thought it over. Marco asked what Ciel wanted. Ciel confirmed it was fine for Ami to use the remaining creation on whatever they chose. Her answer surprised them. She said she wanted to express gratitude to Jane and Joshua, the shopkeepers who had been kind to them from the very beginning. A memory flashed through Amy's mind. The clothing store, where a rude clerk had questioned whether they were orphans, demanded identification, and only changed attitude after seeing gold. Jane and Joshua had never treated them like that. They were genuine, treating the siblings with sincerity, no matter where they came from. Ami felt the same way. Out of everyone in town, those two stood apart. "I will definitely do it," Ciel declared with determination, renewing the promise she had made before. Ami recalled the store clerks who had been rude to her siblings and felt a surge of anger. She said she could not forgive how they had been treated. Ciel and Marco appreciated her protective instincts. Ciel gently told her she had done well holding back at the time. Both siblings were enthusiastic about the gift idea, agreeing wholeheartedly that Jane and Joshua deserved something special. The discussion turned to what kind of gift would be appropriate. Marco suggested food, but Ciel wanted something more meaningful, something that came as a matching pair. Ami thought it over and settled on a pair of watches, mechanical self-winding wristwatches with water resistance and scratch durability. The next day, after completing their delivery at Joshua's general store, they thanked him for his hard work as usual. Then the moment came. Ciel was nervous, but her siblings encouraged her with quiet nods. She steeled herself and announced that they had something to give. Joshua and Jane looked at each other, curious. Then, Ciel held out the watches. Joshua and Jane stared in disbelief. They had never seen timepieces that small. Who knew such small watches could exist, Joshua murmured. Ami described the features: automatic winding, waterproof, durable. Both Joshua and Jane tried to refuse, saying the gift was too extravagant. But Ciel would not back down. Her siblings stood behind her, insisting along with her. A memory surfaced, taking them back to the first time they had met Jane. The hardships, the rejections in an unfriendly town, all of it had led to this moment. That relationship meant everything. The memory deepened. Ciel saw herself as a small, desperate child, clasping her hands together, trembling. I'm sorry, she had repeated, standing before an adult, begging for food because her mother was sick. I'm begging you, she had pleaded. The adult had listened silently. Then the scene shifted. A woman appeared, holding a piece of black bread with a warm smile. Ciel had looked up with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by the simple kindness. Of everyone in town, only Jane had treated her with compassion, giving her food, even though helping a slum child could have damaged the store's reputation. That single act had been unforgettable. Back in the present, Ciel's eyes were filled with tears. I will never, ever forget the gratitude from that time, she said, her voice shaking. She insisted they accept the gift. It was not just a pair of watches. It was years of unspoken thanks finally given shape. Joshua and Jane gave in. The emotion was too real to refuse. Ami stepped forward and taught them how to adjust the time using the town's bell chime as a reference. Joshua fastened his watch to his left wrist. Jane did the same. They both looked down at the small, gleaming timepieces, clearly moved. The gift was a genuine reflection of everything the siblings felt, tied directly to that piece of bread from long ago. In the flashback, Ciel remembered running home with the bread, telling her mother how a kind person had given her food. Her mother had taught her to be grateful, to thank both God and their benefactor. There had been a promise made, quiet and solemn, to never forget kindness. Her mother had also told her to hide a ring, to remain hopeful, and to stay kind-hearted. She mentioned a legend about an angel with silver features who was expected to appear, a symbol of hope and divine intervention. Ciel had held those words close ever since. Back in the present, Ciel stood tall despite her tears. She acknowledged everything Ami had done for them and expressed a desire to keep growing, to become truly independent. This gift, she said, was the first real step toward that. The warmth between them all in that moment was unmistakable, a vision of past hardship transformed into shared joy and gratitude. Joshua and Jane both thanked them warmly for the wristwatches and promised to treasure them. Ami turned to Ciel and asked if she was happy to have finally shown her gratitude. Ciel looked content. The weight she had been carrying finally lifted. Then, Ami addressed Joshua. She asked if she could ask him a favor. Joshua tilted his head, curious. She asked if they could take a break from deliveries tomorrow. Joshua agreed without hesitation, saying they still had enough stock. Ami then asked if switching to every other day deliveries would work. Joshua nodded and clarified it was not because the products were not selling. The opposite, actually. He was treating the honey and soap as luxury goods, carefully selecting buyers to keep the products feeling exclusive. Ami listened and nodded, impressed. Business really was a deep subject. Joshua reassured them about their future collaboration, saying he looked forward to continuing the partnership. Back at their home behind the guild, the siblings talked about what to do with the extra free time. The guild courses were finished. Deliveries would be every other day now. For the first time since escaping the slums, they had room to breathe. Ami said she thought it would be great to have more free time. They had been running non-stop, and they deserved a break. Reflecting on everything it had taken to get here, they decided to appreciate the leisure. Ami looked at her siblings and told them she wanted to thank her beloved Ciel and Marco. The warmth in her voice was unmistakable. Wah! The siblings cheered, celebrating the moment together. She asked what they wanted. Marco declared without a second thought that meat was the best. Ciel was quieter. She thought about it and shyly admitted that she had always wanted to taste the honey they sold, but she had held back because it was expensive and meant for customers. That hit Ami hard. She realized Ciel had been suppressing her own wants this whole time, so the products could be sold for profit. A wave of guilt washed over her. She apologized to Ciel for not noticing sooner. Ciel shook her head and told her there was nothing to apologize for. Ami's hard work had gotten them out of the slums and let them repay Joshua and Jane. Everything they had now was because of her. Ciel got emotional as she spoke, insisting that Ami's efforts had been more than enough. Ami's eyes filled with tears. Ciel, Marco, she called out, her voice breaking. She promised she would make them lots of delicious food from now on. She wanted to make up for all the patience they had shown. Her siblings thanked her, delighted by the offering. She activated imagination creation. 2 big brown boxes materialized. The first was a 120-piece set of authentic aged beef jerky, priced at 99,800 yen. The second was a commercial set of 1,200 jam and honey sachets in assorted flavors, priced at 32,400 yen. Marco's jaw dropped when he saw the box of jerky. "This whole box is full of dried meat?" he exclaimed. Ami explained the different flavors and qualities, grinning as she talked up how good it would be as a snack. Ciel stared at the mountain of jam packets, stunned. "So much sweet honey?" she gasped. Ami humorously imagined them both reaching a cat-like state of bliss from indulging in all the sweets. She told them to eat as much as they wanted. There was plenty to go around. "Thank you, Ochibi," both siblings exclaimed, beaming. But then the mood shifted. They asked what Ami herself wanted. She had been working so hard for everyone else, but had never once thought about herself. Ami froze. "What I truly want?" she murmured, confused and touched by their sincerity. They reminded her that it was important to think about her own wishes. She had been working non-stop, and they wanted her to have something too. The words broke something open in her. She thought back over everything they had been through together. Ciel and Marco had stayed by her side since the slums. They had never abandoned her, not once, no matter how hard things got. The realization swelled up inside her chest and burst. She started sobbing, stammering apologies through her tears, overwhelmed by how much they meant to her. Through her tears, Ami whispered that she wanted to be with Ciel and Marco forever. They both looked at her with warmth and support. Ciel told her it was okay, that no matter what happened, they would always be there. Marco nodded firmly, saying they would continue to be by her side. "We'll be together forever," they declared with joyful expressions. Ami cried herself out, and as the tears faded, the answer became clear. What she truly wanted was. She activated imagination creation one more time. A board game collection appeared, a set priced at just 2,480 yen. Ciel and Marco looked at it, puzzled. "Ochibi, is that what you truly want?" they asked. Ami held it up with both hands. What she truly wanted was to play together with everyone. Not food, not money, not anything expensive, just time together, having fun. One of them said it looked kind of interesting. The other asked her to teach them how to play. Ami nodded eagerly, and they settled in together. Later that evening, the siblings tasted their gifts. Ciel dipped into the honey sachets, sighing with delight. "So sweet," she murmured. "Honey with fruit flavoring is like a dream come true." Marco tore into the jerky and could not stop eating, but Ciel admitted she could not finish everything, saying it would be a waste to let any go uneaten. That gave Ami an idea. She suggested they share some of the treats with the people who had taken care of them. They headed to the Hunter Guild. "Hello," Ami called out brightly as they walked in. Irene greeted them at the reception, recognizing Team Shusa right away. Ami explained they had brought some delicious things to share and hoped everyone would like them. They handed Irene bags of beef jerky and sachets of jam and honey. Irene was surprised by the amount, exclaiming that there was so much. She accepted them with gratitude. Then, she inspected the transparent packets with curiosity, amazed at how they sealed in the scent. Mason appeared, intrigued by the commotion. They gave him the same gifts. He studied the transparent bags closely, requesting a closer look. He admitted he had never seen anything like them and accepted with his usual gruff thanks. The curiosity and admiration on his face set a warm and slightly mysterious tone as the evening wound down. The chapter opened with a tense scene. Guild officials sat gathered at a table, their expressions solemn. Ami, Ciel, and Marco sat across from them, wide-eyed and nervous. Ami could not figure out what was going on. She kept turning the situation over in her head, wondering what they had done wrong. A flashback cut in. Earlier, Ami had spotted a grass-mowing quest on the guild bulletin board and decided to take it. Ciel and Marco handled the job using their water and fire magic, repeating the process until the whole area was cleared. Ami felt like she had barely contributed, but the quest got done. Back at the guild, Irene greeted them warmly the moment they walked in. She thanked them for the treats they had shared, saying everything was delicious. Ami asked if she had enjoyed the honey, figuring Irene had a sweet tooth, but Irene surprised her. She said she actually preferred the spicy, salty dried meat. She had eaten it with ale, and it was incredible. Then Mason chimed in from the side. He went on about how the honey turned plain black bread into the best dessert he had ever tasted. Ami found it funny that the tough-looking Mason had such a sweet tooth. Irene waved off the assumption that appearance said anything about taste. The mood was light, but then Irene gathered the siblings and told them she needed to bring them somewhere to discuss something important. That brought them to the present. The siblings now sat at the table with Mason, Logan the branch master, Ethan the vice branch master, Hannah the purchasing department head, and Irene. everyone exchanged introductions, revealing their respective titles. Ami's anxiety spiked. She had no idea why so many important people wanted to speak with them. The officials quickly reassured the nervous children. They said there was no bad news. Logan, the white-bearded branch master, brought up the gifts the siblings had shared with Irene and Mason. He said the guild had taken a strong interest in those items and wanted to talk about them further. There was clearly potential here for something bigger. Logan flashed a peace sign and proposed that the guild sell the dried meat and honey packets. "Eh?" the children said in unison, staring back in surprise. Irene said the dried meat was too good to keep hidden and should be more widely known. Hannah agreed, saying the purchasing department absolutely wanted to carry the products. Mason added that having the honey available in the cafeteria with bread would be a hit. Ami could hardly believe it. She and her siblings were thrilled that their shared food had been enjoyed so much. The idea that more people could appreciate these items made them genuinely happy. Then, Ethan adjusted his glasses and shifted the conversation. He mentioned the transparent packaging the items came in, describing it as a mysterious material that sealed in moisture and scent perfectly. The siblings recoiled in surprise. Ami realized with a jolt that she had forgotten to remove the packaging before giving the gifts away. One of the siblings nervously stammered out an excuse, saying Ami had been in a bad mood and simply forgot. But Ethan continued calmly. He revealed that the guild was already aware of their special delivery arrangement with Joshua. The children were visibly shaken. Logan carried on, recognizing the transparent packaging as something unique to this world that hinted at a special ability. He pointed out that since Ciel used water magic and Marco used fire and wind, the creation ability had to belong to the youngest member of the group. Marco jumped in defensively, insisting it was a team effort, a collaborative magic between all three of them. Ciel backed him up, saying they needed to protect their little sister, but the guild official smiled knowingly, noting the fire, wind, and water magic accounted for the siblings, which meant the special ability could only belong to the little girl. Ami tried to put on a serious face, hoping to bluff her way through, but she knew internally she was grasping at nothing. Then, the guild leader reflected on the girl's attributes and her name. The trio's faces went white with shock. A flashback showed the moment they had registered at the guild, where they had signed Ami up under a different name to conceal her true identity. Marco looked pensive, the weight of the consequences pressing down on him. The dam broke. Marco tearfully confessed that Ami was the one who created everything. He feared what might happen if her abilities became widely known. Ciel echoed his plea through tears, begging the guild to keep this a secret and to protect their little sister. "Please protect Ochibi-chan if possible," Ciel pleaded. "Could you please keep this a secret?" Marco cried out. Both of them were visibly shaking. Ami watched her siblings, her heart aching. "Ciel, Marco," she whispered, moved by how fiercely they fought to protect her. Logan raised his hand gently and told them not to worry. That had been the guild's intention from the very beginning. Mason muttered that the branch chief had been scaring the kids too much with his roundabout approach. Logan apologized for frightening them. He explained that the guild simply wanted to make things easier for the children, so they would not have to sneak around anymore. He asked gently if they would be willing to leave it to the Hunter Guild. A lighter moment followed. It turned out the guild staff had assumed the gifts were a strategic move to win the guild's favor. Someone had even eaten the jerky, thinking it was a calculated token. Ami shook her head and insisted they had just wanted to share because the food was good. The misunderstanding got a few chuckles from the room. The conversation shifted to the siblings' magic. One of the officials mentioned that their magical abilities had been the subject of much talk within the guild. Both Ciel and Marco were surprised to hear that. Logan formally announced that the Hunter Guild wanted to negotiate with Team Shusa. "This is great news," Ami said, relief washing over her. This was not a threat, it was an offer, and the guild was promising protection. The negotiation moved to specifics. Ami confidently said she could produce 100 pieces of each type of dried meat and small packets of honey every 1 to 3 days. One of the officials was stunned. 1,000 pieces? They exclaimed. Concerns about her well-being were raised, worried the workload might be too taxing. Ami smiled cheerfully and told them not to worry, saying she would not experience any burden from it. The guild suggested leaving some flexibility just in case, proposing a regular delivery schedule of once every 5 days. Ami agreed promptly, satisfied with the arrangement. Logan then promised that the guild would protect all 3 of them. Ami was grateful for that. When she turned to Ciel and Marco to ask what they thought, both siblings said they would support whatever she decided. The trust between them was absolute. The deal was sealed, and for the first time, Team Shusa had the full backing of the Hunter Guild behind them. With the deal in place, the negotiation turned to the details of the guild's protection. Ami told Logan she wanted the guild to step in and mediate smoothly if they ever ran into trouble. Logan and the other officials looked a little surprised at how mature the request sounded coming from someone so small. Ami went on, admitting she understood the complexities of laws and that there might be situations where her group was in the wrong. She just wanted fair handling. Ethan nodded and assured them the guild would do its best to manage disputes, though he warned that their influence had limits when it came to nobles or powerful figures. Logan chuckled at how much thought Ami had put into this at her age. The guild then clarified something the siblings had not expected. The mediation and protection were separate from any reward for the deliveries. That would be handled independently. Ami blinked, confused. She had assumed the protection was the reward. Mason teased her, asking if she really thought the guild would try to shortchange them. The guild asked what she wanted in return for the deliveries. Ami thought for a moment and said she wanted something harder to get than money. She asked if the reward could be the open grassy area behind the guild, the tall grass field where they had been hiding. The siblings backed her up immediately. The guild officials exchanged looks. They admitted the land was practically worthless in their eyes, neglected and overgrown with no real asset value. But to the children, it was everything. Logan agreed to grant it. The siblings erupted in joy, cheering that they finally had their own land. Afterward, the stress of the negotiation caught up with them. The siblings talked about how nerve-wracking it had been and how relieved they were. They thanked Ami for leading the way, but Ami went quiet. She felt guilty for not contributing to the grass-mowing quest earlier that day when Ciel and Marco had done all the work. The weight of the day pressed down on her, and before she knew it, she had fallen asleep. 2 days later, a visitor arrived at their newly acquired land. He stepped in and was impressed by how spacious and well-maintained the interior looked. The children welcomed him warmly, proud to show off what they had built. Ciel and Marco explained how they had cleared the area. Ciel used her water magic to contain the fire, while Marco burned the weeds with his fire magic. The visitor was impressed, complimenting their method. Ciel said she enjoyed using her magic, and Marco proudly declared he was good at fire magic. Then the visitor noticed a large iron box on wheels and asked what it was. The siblings proudly introduced it as their minivan, their home. The concept surprised him entirely. He admitted he had never heard of a minivan before. The metal body was painted in blue silver with glass windows, and while the inside was small and a bit cramped, it was tidy and surprisingly comfortable for their size. A unique home solution, he remarked. Cool and unusual, noting the glass windows were something else. The conversation shifted to the delivery. Mason spotted the cardboard boxes and asked about them. The siblings explained that cardboard was a lightweight box made from paper. Mason found that hard to believe, picking one up and marveling at how light it was. In this world, paper was considered valuable, so a box made entirely from it seemed luxurious. A playful exchange followed about the economic value of paper and how unusual the material was. The siblings had already set aside some leftovers for their own meals and snacks. The rest went to the guild. They handed over 100 bags of dried meat and 1,000 packets of honey. Mason gave them a completion report that also doubled as a land transfer certificate. He explained there were no taxes or fees since the land had zero value on paper. Then came the surprise. Mason pulled out a designated request document for future deliveries. The siblings stared at it. He explained it was a continuation request for their next delivery in 5 days. Listed on it were purchase prices, 30 ril per bag of dried meat and 15 ril per packet of honey. The siblings were stunned. They had assumed the land was the only reward. Ciel asked in disbelief if they were really going to be paid money on top of that. Mason said the guild could not accept deliveries for free. It would damage their reputation. Ami did the math in her head, comparing the earnings to yen from her past life. 100 bags of jerky at 30 ril each came to 3,000 ril. 1,000 honey packets at 15 each totaled 15,000. That was 18,000 ril every 5 days. She could barely process the number. The siblings sat there, still in shock, trying to make sense of the windfall. Mason then offered to pull the folding cart back to their home for them. He found the silver cart fascinating, asking what it was called and admiring how it folded up. He loaded the kids onto it and told them to hold on. Mason grabbed the handle and started pulling. "Is that okay, Oni?" one of the siblings asked, eyes sparkling with excitement. Marco had climbed on first, claiming the spot with a grin. Ciel scrambled on after him. Mason noted how light the cart felt, despite carrying all 3 of them. He muttered to himself about how useful it could be for transporting goods. Then he picked up speed. The cart rattled along faster and faster. Mason called back, telling them not to fall off. "Awawa!" Ami yelped, clinging to Ciel's clothes. "Kia!" Ciel squealed. "Yahoo!" Marco cheered, loving every second. The ride was wild, bumpy, and the children could not stop laughing. They arrived home, and the siblings thanked Mason for the ride. He said the cart had been very handy. Mason glanced around the garden, pondering what else was left to see. Then his attention landed on something massive. "It's a trampoline!" one of the children exclaimed, pointing at it. The siblings explained it was a toy for jumping, something Amy had created to make the garden more fun. It had cost 225,000 yen. Mason looked skeptical at first, questioning whether something that big could really be a plaything, but the children encouraged him to try it. He climbed on. The moment he jumped, the entire trampoline thundered under his weight. "Wahoy!" he shouted, launching himself high into the air. "Yahoo!" His face split into the biggest grin the children had ever seen on him. Ami smiled, happy that even Mason was having a good time. Then, Ami used imagination creation to make something new. A large playground slide materialized in the garden, costing 298,000 yen. Mason's eyes went wide at the price, but Amy did not mind. She wanted the garden to be a place where everyone could have fun. She slid down it happily, demonstrating how it worked. The connection between her skill level and the cost of what she could create came up briefly, with the siblings noting how larger and heavier items matched higher price points. Mason watched it all, quietly taking in how impressive their abilities were. He reflected on what had been discussed at the guild meeting, how the land had been transformed using fire and water magic, and how Ami could create things like the trampoline, the cart, and now a slide with such quality and durability. He expressed his appreciation for the day, saying it had been a blast and he had learned a lot. The children told him to visit anytime, joking that he was probably just killing time anyway. Mason laughed and headed off, promising he would be back. After Mason left, the conversation about the folding cart continued among the guild staff. They discussed its durability and how it was made from an unfamiliar metal that was both light and sturdy. Mason had noted how easy it was to pull even at full speed with the kids on board. The idea of having the cart delivered to the guild for regular use came up. There was some back and forth about costs and whether a cheaper option could work. They discussed Ami's ability to create items, noting that while it seemed limitless, there were some restrictions. Still, the quality of her creations made it hard to settle for less. Logan sat back and thought about Ami's potential. The old branch master mused over what a child with that kind of creative power could become. He noted how energetic she still was, even after building an entire playground slide. She never seemed to run out of steam. He then described the three siblings in his own way. He compared them to three animals: a magical red-haired puppy for Marco, full of energy and fire; a light blue rabbit for Ciel, gentle and careful; and a gray chinchilla for Ami, small and creative with seemingly endless ability. Someone corrected him, saying they were not grandchildren, but well-behaved children. Logan took it in stride. The guild officials agreed on one thing. Despite their power, these three were still just kids. It was the guild's responsibility to guide them properly and ensure they had a good future. But there was a note of caution. One of them warned about being careful of people from the church, referencing past events involving a previous divine messenger. The church's interest in special abilities could pose a threat if word got out. Meanwhile, far from those heavy concerns, Ami slid down the warm slide in her garden one more time, laughing without a care in the world. The chapter opened at Madame Mary's medicine shop. Mary stood before the three siblings with a warm expression and told them she was entrusting the potion making to them. Ami, Ciel, and Marco responded eagerly, saying they looked forward to working with her. Ami was perched on a chair to see over the counter, barely able to contain her excitement. Being directly commissioned for potion crafting felt like a big step. A flashback explained how they had ended up here. The lawn mowing job they had done for Mary's garden had caught her attention. Ciel's water magic contained the flames, while Marco's fire magic burned the weeds. Mary had watched the whole thing and saw potential. Ami had not contributed much to the mowing itself, but she resolved to support Ciel and Marco however she could this time around. Mary then introduced someone new. A girl stepped forward shyly and said her name was Alice. Ami noticed she looked about the same age as Ciel. Mary explained that Alice was her granddaughter, and she hoped the group could become friends. The siblings welcomed her warmly. Before they began, Ami decided they would need to take notes. She activated imagination creation, and a stationery set appeared with a playful mego sound effect. There was a brief comedic moment as she shuffled some of the less appropriate items out of sight, muttering to herself that the full set was a bit much for a work setting. Mary started explaining the potion making process. She told them to pinch out the proper amount of a powder, Ami immediately worried about what proper amount meant. Mary admitted she relied on intuition built from years of experience. The siblings exchanged uncertain glances. Using instinct when they were complete beginners felt daunting. Ciel and Marco voiced their concern, saying they had no idea how to judge the right amount without some kind of measurement. Mary reassured them, explaining that precise measuring tools simply did not exist in this world. Then, Ami had an idea. She quietly used imagination creation again, and a chemistry measuring set materialized. Mary stared at it, amazed by the modern tools. When Amy asked if she could measure the exact amounts Mary pinched out, the older woman agreed with a thankful nod. Alice watched the whole thing quietly, unsure what to make of it all. With the tools ready, Ami got to work, carefully measuring the powder and water, keeping track of the time with a timer. Marco's fire magic would handle the heating. Despite some nervousness, the whole team was determined to get it right. Alice softly said she thought it would probably be okay, and Ciel declared she would do her best. Ami reassured Ciel and Marco, who still looked worried, telling them they had everything they needed. Mary encouraged them with a friendly smile. Ami told Mary she did not need to worry about measuring things again. One time was enough. She had written everything down. Mary looked curious but supportive, emphasizing that self-initiative was exactly what she wanted to see. Then, it was time for the next part. Ami turned to Alice, who nervously nodded. The siblings made a bold move. They proposed making a potion entirely on their own. Mary and Alice looked surprised. Ami insisted they were ready. She had all the steps written down and every measurement recorded. There was no reason they could not do it. They got into position. Ciel summoned her water magic, while Marco applied his fire magic, both following Ami's precise directions on timing and amounts. The pressure was on, and the siblings felt it, but they trusted Ami's notes and pushed through. The potion formed, but when they looked at the result, doubt crept in. The color seemed off. Ami stared at it with growing concern, wondering if they had messed something up. The room went quiet for a moment. Mary stepped in to evaluate. She examined the potion carefully. Then her eyes widened. She noted the deep color and strong concentration of mana. She declared it was a good potion, more than good. She said the magic processing had been handled remarkably well. The siblings were stunned. Mary went further. She told Ciel and Marco that they had real potential. She predicted a bright future for them as mages if they kept developing their skills. The praise hit them hard. Both siblings lit up, overwhelmed with gratitude and pride. Ami beamed at them, thrilled to see her brother and sister recognized for their talent. Alice, moved by the whole scene, quietly asked if she could join them for potion making next time. She wanted to learn alongside them. Mary made a decision. She would entrust the regular potion making duties to the young ones while she focused on other tasks. One of the siblings called the idea great, and Mary smiled warmly in response. Ami and Alice shook hands. "Let's work hard together," Ami said, eyes sparkling. I'll be in your care," Alice stammered back, and Ami grinned. Ami pumped herself up. "It's time for me to help again," but mid-sentence, exhaustion slammed into her. Ugh! The energy drained from her face. She had been concentrating so hard on taking notes, measuring every ingredient, and creating a conversion chart so the others could read the numbers in this world's format. That's right, she had even converted the foreign numbers into ones everyone could understand. The effort caught up to her all at once. Her eyes grew heavy and she started swaying. Ciel and Marco both looked surprised and worried. "Is Ochibi-chan all right?" Marco asked, his voice full of concern. Without waiting for an answer, he scooped her up. "I'm taking you to a place where you can rest, right now." Ciel smiled gently, observing that it was time for Ochibi-chan's midday nap. Ami looked apologetic and sleepy as Marco carried her off. Ami stirred and opened her eyes, realizing she had fallen asleep. Mary was sitting nearby. Ami apologized, but Mary waved it off kindly, telling her that for someone as little as her, sleeping was practically her job. Mary then wondered aloud if the other three were still occupied with potion making. While sitting with Mary, Ami noticed the older woman squinting at some small print, struggling to read it. Ami thought she might be farsighted. An idea clicked. She activated imagination creation and produced a desktop magnifying glass designed for reading, priced at 5,280 yen. Mary's eyes went wide when Ami presented it to her. Something else had changed too. Ami realized she could now use imagination creation 4 times a day instead of 3. Her skill had leveled up. On top of that, her physical condition had improved. She was no longer classified as malnourished. The new status read underdeveloped and underweight, which was still not great, but it was progress. She felt a quiet pride in how far she had come. She offered the magnifying glass to Mary with a bright smile, telling her to please accept it. Mary was touched, though she looked a little guilty about receiving such a gift. Ami then made one more request. She asked Mary to invite Ciel and Marco back for potion making again. She wanted them to keep learning and growing. Mary agreed, and Ami watched happily as the older woman tried the magnifying glass, marveling at how clearly she could read now. Then, just as things felt settled, Ami glanced at something and froze. Her eyes went wide. The calculation is wrong? Ami stared at the delivery report, her mind racing. The calculation was definitely wrong. She wanted to point it out, but a wave of doubt hit her. She was 5 years old. Would anyone even take her seriously? Then, an idea lit up in her head. If she could not just tell them, she could show them. She activated imagination creation and produced an abacus, priced at 3,080 yen. A visual tool would make the math impossible to argue with. She brought it over to Mary and introduced it proudly, calling it a calculation device. Mary tilted her head. Abacus? Calculation device? She was curious but amused. Ami launched into what she mentally dubbed Ochibi's abacus lecture, walking Mary through how the beads worked and how calculations could be performed step by step. She even mentioned, with a hint of pride from her past life, that she held a level 4 abacus certification. "Whew, this is interesting," Mary murmured, leaning in. She followed along as Ami used the abacus to trace through the numbers on the report. Sure enough, there it was, a miscalculation. Mary's expression shifted from surprise to understanding, and she smiled warmly. "Good job spotting that mistake, Ochibi-chan." Ami beamed. She offered the abacus to Mary as a gift. The moment felt special in a way she had not expected. She realized this was the first time she had spent this long talking one-on-one with someone other than Oni and Ni. That thought made her happy in a quiet, unexpected way. She then went to check on the others. She asked how the potion making had gone while she was resting. The feedback was positive. They said measuring the powder had been tricky, but they managed. Then Alice spoke up, her face glowing. She said she had been able to make a potion all by herself. Ami was surprised. She realized Alice had always depended on Mary for the measurements, and now, with the tools and notes, she had broken through on her own. Alice's thoughts drifted to her past. A series of memories surfaced. Her parents had been skilled apothecaries, well known for their magic abilities. But 4 years ago, they died in an accident. Since then, Alice had been trying to carry on their legacy, training under Mary. She wanted to make the name Apothecary Alice something people would remember. She wanted to become someone her parents would have been proud of. Alice's frustration ran deep. For 4 years, she had followed her grandmother's instructions, but she could never make a potion properly on her own. Mary had always told her that potion making required talent, and Alice had started to wonder if she simply did not have it. Those years of solitary practice had been lonely and discouraging. Then one day, a trio of young hunters showed up at the shop. A cheerful boy skilled in fire magic, a gentle girl with water magic, and a tiny kid who did not seem to use magic at all. They were there on a guild commission and were eager to learn. Alice watched as Mary demonstrated the process, but the tiny one interrupted. She pulled out precise measuring tools and a notebook and started recording every detail. The method was completely different from the intuitive approach Alice had grown up with. Alice watched, uncertain at first, unsure what to make of this strange new way of doing things. The trio asked if they could try making a potion on their own. Alice doubted they could pull it off. She herself had struggled for years, but they did it. They completed a potion, and Mary declared it high grade, praising its rich mana content. She told the boy and girl they had real futures as mages. Alice took it all in, but in her eyes, the most impressive one was not the fire mage or the water mage. It was the little girl, the one who could not use magic but had created an entire system of tools and instructions that made precise potion making possible for anyone. The precision of those instruments, the way they measured everything down to exact amounts, Alice marveled at their effectiveness. She wanted tools like that for herself. If she had them, she could succeed even without her grandmother guiding every step. The emotion overwhelmed her. She asked to join them in potion making, desperate to learn their method. And when she tried, she did it. After 4 years of failure, Alice made a potion on her own. The weight of all those lonely years cracked open, and she felt something shift inside her. But there was a problem. Alice's expression turned troubled. She said she could not continue making potions alone. When Amy pointed out that Alice could make potions independently now, Alice looked startled, replying with uncertainty. She explained that she did not have the measuring instruments. Without the tools, she would be back to guessing. Ami smiled confidently and told her that was not a problem at all. The measuring tools they had used would stay right here at the shop. Eh? Alice's eyes went wide. She had not expected that. Ami went further. She cheerfully decided to give Alice everything, the notebook, the stationery, all of it. The others expressed approval and encouragement. Alice looked stunned, worried about how expensive the tools must be. Is this really fine, Ochibi-chan? Ami nodded confidently. Yep, she meant it. Then Ami made one more offer. She asked Alice to come play with them sometime. Alice clutched the notebook tightly to her chest. Does that mean? Ami grinned and said it plainly. We want you to be our friend. One of the siblings jumped in, calling it a great idea. Wah! A female friend? Alice cried out, her eyes sparkling wide, overwhelmed with joy. She had never had a friend her own age before. She agreed with everything she had, voice cracking with emotion. They all held hands together, sealing the friendship right there in the shop. In the background, Mary watched the whole thing unfold. Her eyes glistened. She had been worried about Alice for a long time. The girl had been so focused on training and living up to her parents' memory that she had never made any friends. Seeing her laugh and hold hands with these children was more than Mary could have hoped for. She murmured that it had truly been a wonderful day. They all agreed to keep working together. Mary would continue making potion-making requests through the guild, and Alice would join Ciel and Marco for future sessions. Alice reflected quietly on everything that had happened. She had made her first potion, received her own set of tools, and gained her first real friends, all in a single day. As the scene shifted to the Hunter Guild, the feeling of new beginnings hung warmly in the air. Back at the Hunter Guild, Ami looked visibly worn out. The others noticed and expressed concern. Ami blinked, surprised and confused. Had she done something wrong? Was she the reason someone looked exhausted? Mason was the one who filled in the blanks. He held up a completion report and explained that Ami had created a string of items during the potion-making commission. A chemistry measuring set, a desktop magnifier, an abacus, and more. Every single one of those had to be documented, and Irene had been the one stuck processing the paperwork. The sheer number of created items had overwhelmed her. Ami's face dropped. She had not even thought about the extra work she was causing. She realized that every time she used imagination creation, someone at the guild had to record and file it. Guilt washed over her immediately. She thought about what she could do to make it up to Irene, and then it clicked. She remembered a promise she had made before. This was the perfect chance to follow through. She activated imagination creation and produced a bottle of single malt whiskey called Zakiyama, priced at 10,000 yen. She presented it to Irene as a golden-colored treat. Irene looked confused at first, not sure what she was holding, but once she understood what it was, her expression transformed. Her eyes lit up with excitement, practically sparkling. Ami quickly pointed out that it was alcohol and strictly off limits for her and her siblings. Irene understood, though she could not hide a flicker of disappointment that the kids could not share in it. They joked about finding a candy shop instead, agreeing they would go together sometime. Ami then turned serious. She bowed to Irene and formally apologized for all the trouble she had caused. She said she was sorry for making so much extra work without thinking. Irene accepted the apology gracefully, but made one request. She asked Ami to report her created items more clearly going forward, so the paperwork would not pile up again. Ami promised she would be more careful from now on. Irene took the whiskey, and Ami told her it was meant as a personal gift and that she should open it in private. The revelation that it was an adult gift shocked Irene for a moment. Then, her eyes softened. Tears welled up as the gesture sank in. She felt genuinely understood and appreciated. It was a small thing, but it meant a lot to her. With the air cleared, the mood lifted. The group decided to head out to Theodore's candy shop, which was known for its quality sweets. But before that, Ami and the others stopped by the guild bulletin board to check for any interesting quests, already looking ahead to their next adventure. The trip to Theodore's candy shop did not go the way they hoped. The three siblings walked in expecting sweets and walked out looking miserable. The shopkeeper had taken one look at them and shooed them away, snapping that they lowered the class of his establishment and that it was no place for poor brats. He made it clear they were not welcome. The siblings stood outside, shaken and hurt. That was horrible, they muttered to each other. It was the worst experience they had since escaping the slums. On the guild bulletin board earlier, they had noticed a quest posted by Theodore's shop. It offered just 1 ril per gram for a requested item, while other shops offered 2. Ami quickly figured out that the deal was terrible. After accounting for container costs, they would essentially be giving their product away for free. The low offer matched the attitude of the shopkeeper perfectly. As they wandered, still stung from the rejection, a cheerful voice called out to them. A friendly vendor named Laura was promoting galletes from her stall. The siblings had never heard of her shop before, and Amy figured it must have been a recently opened spot in what used to be a vacant location. Laura invited them in warmly and offered to let them try her food. Despite their skepticism, they agreed. Ami took a bite and, true to form, gave her honest opinion. She said it was not very good. Ciel tried to smooth things over, claiming it was quite tasty. Marco, meanwhile, quietly added some of their jam to his galette to improve the flavor. Laura noticed the change in taste and looked confused, unable to figure out what had made such a difference. The conversation that followed revealed the problem. Laura explained that the flour she received from the guild was low quality. The best ingredients always went to the higher-ranking shops first, leaving smaller vendors like her with the scraps. Despite the disadvantage, she kept at it. The siblings appreciated that. After being thrown out of Theodore's, finding a shop that actually welcomed them as customers meant something. Ami had an idea. She used imagination creation and produced a bag of pancake mix. She suggested Laura try using it as the base for her gallettes instead. Laura gave it a shot, and the result was immediate. The gallettes came out sweeter, smoother, and leagues better than before. The siblings lit up, praising the taste and texture. Laura stared at the finished product, stunned by how much of a difference the mix had made. She asked what it was that had changed things so dramatically. The chapter closed with everyone gathered around Laura's stall, eating the improved gallettes with smiles on their faces. For a day that had started with the sting of rejection, it ended on a surprisingly warm note. Word of the siblings' creations had reached the guild staff. At the Hunter Guild, one of the officials marveled at the transparent bags and unfamiliar materials Ami had been producing, calling them unlike anything they had ever seen. Another expressed surprise and fascination, noting how the packaging sealed everything perfectly. The excitement in the room was building. Ami cheerfully offered to tell them everything she knew about sweets and treats. She suggested they all go to the Hunter Guild to discuss things properly. Laura blinked, confused about why the guild was significant, but Ami was already moving ahead with a proposal. The guild should carry their goods directly, including honey and other products. She even asked if they could buy from Laura as well, slipping in a casual Laura One-chan that got a few chuckles. The guild staff were eager to accommodate. The energy at the table was buzzing. One of the guild members glanced at the children sitting there and wondered aloud who exactly these kids were and how they had gotten so deeply involved in guild business. It was a fair question for anyone seeing it for the first time. Ami's thoughts turned to her imagination creation skill. Now that it had leveled up to 4, she wanted to test its limits. The math formed in her head quickly. At level 4, the maximum value per use should be around 400,000 yen. Time for an experiment. 1,500 packets at once. The first attempt failed. Adjusting the numbers and trying again yielded the same result. Another failure, but persistence won out. After several more tries, tweaking the quantity each time, it finally worked. A massive pile of packets materialized in front of her, confirming the fiscal cap exactly as she had predicted. Ami could not contain herself. She announced her success with open excitement, beaming at everyone in the room. The conversation quickly turned to delivery volume. With Ami's production capacity now proven, the guild discussed increasing the quantities. The numbers she was throwing around left the officials stunned. They talked through the logistics, the paperwork, and how to structure formal requests for the goods going forward. Then the mood shifted. Ami brought up what had happened at Theodore's confectionery. She told them how the shopkeeper had treated her and her siblings, throwing them out and calling them poor brats. The room went quiet. Concern rippled through the officials about what it would mean for the shop's prestige if word got out. The decision was swift. They would not sell any of Ami's products to Theodore's shop. One of them asked if that was really the intention, and the answer was firm. The supplier's wishes would be respected. There was no argument. The guild staff assured them it would be handled. The next morning, the siblings headed to Joshua's general store for their usual delivery. They arrived in good spirits, the previous day's victory still fresh in their minds. But the moment they saw Joshua's face, they knew something was wrong. Joshua stood outside the shop, looking pale and shaken. He told them he had received a summons from the Lord. The siblings froze. A summons from the Lord was not something that happened to ordinary shopkeepers. The weight of it hung in the air as surprise and concern spread across their faces. The warm glow of everything they had built was suddenly overshadowed by an uncertain future. Whatever the Lord wanted, it was enough to rattle a man like Joshua to his core. And if Joshua was worried, the siblings had every reason to be too.